video, I'm going to go through a bunch of keyboard shortcuts that I found to be the most beneficial for speeding up my workflow. It would be crazy to think that you could memorize all of these keyboard shortcuts just from watching this video, so I've created a downloadable PDF guide in the Projects and Resources tab below the video. I'm obviously on a Mac, but if you're not, here are some common ways that keyboard shortcuts are different. So for instance, when I'm using Command something like Command Z, you'll need to do Control Z. There's both a Mac and PC version of the keyboard shortcuts guide, so just make sure to grab the version that you need. You can also find a complete list of keyboard shortcuts under Edit Keyboard Shortcuts. Using keyboard shortcuts may not seem like a big deal, but once committed to memory, they are definitely faster than going through menus or toggling down layers to find what you need. And saving a second here or there can really add up. Rather than trying to learn a bunch of new keyboard shortcuts at once, I found that it's helpful to just pick one or a few related ones and get into the habit of using those. So you could write them down on a sticky note that you put on the side of your computer to remind you. Then once you get into the habit of using those consistently, then choose a few more to learn. Let's start with some of the more obvious keyboard shortcuts. A lot of these are the same for most other programs too, so if you aren't already using these keyboard shortcuts, this is a good place to start. Command S for save is a really important one to know. Command C for copy and Command V for paste are super useful, and you can copy and paste keyframes, layers, all kinds of different things. You can even copy and paste keyframes from one layer to another layer. Command D will duplicate a layer. And in the project panel, Command I will let you import files from outside of After Effects. To play back an animation, you can just hit spacebar. And you can use spacebar again to pause. And of course, the most frequently used keyboard shortcut of all is Command Z for undo. Like we covered before, Command F will let you search in your timeline. And if you have the project panel selected, Command F will bring up the search in the project panel. Let's take a look at some keyboard shortcuts to move around your workspace. The first ones are the plus and minus keys to zoom in and out on your timeline. You can also do Command plus to zoom into your composition viewer and Command minus to zoom out. Or alternatively, you can use the comma to zoom out and the period to zoom in. If you want to fit your composition to view, you can do Shift and the slash key to fit it to view, or you can use Option and Shift to fit it to view up to 200% or whatever percentage you have here. You can also hover your mouse and use the scroll wheel on the mouse to zoom into a certain area. But since that area is a moving target, you might get a little lost, and in that case you can just hold down the spacebar to bring up the hand tool and then drag your composition wherever you need it. You can also do H to get to the hand tool, and this will stay on the hand tool so you don't have to hold down any keys. If you want to zoom all the way into your timeline to 1 frame increments, just hit the semicolon key. If you want to make a certain panel full screen, just hover over that panel with your mouse and hit the tilde key. And then hit the tilde key again to go back to your normal view. This works for any panel. Now let's check out some keyboard shortcuts for different tools. So we've already covered the hand tool, which is H. That lets you drag your composition viewer around. V is going to be back to the selection tool. Y on the keyboard will bring you to the pan behind tool, which lets you move the anchor point for a layer. Q will bring you to the rectangle tool. And pressing Q again will bring you to the rounded rectangle tool, then the ellipse tool, the polygon tool, the star tool, and back to the rectangle tool. G on the keyboard will bring you to the pen tool, and if you press G again, it will bring you to the feather mask tool. If you hit Command T on the keyboard, it'll bring you to the text tool where you can just click and start writing text. Let's go over some keyboard shortcuts for more quickly navigating throughout your timeline. This composition I'm using as an example is a tentacle of one of my jellyfish. So don't be distracted by what's going on in this composition. We just really are looking at the timeline and the keyframes. The first one is if you want to move your playhead to the start of a layer, just hit I. Or if you want to move your playhead to the end of your layer, hit O. If you want to go to the beginning of your timeline and you have an extended keyboard, you can just hit Home. And if you want to go to the end of your timeline, again with the extended keyboard, hit End. To go to the beginning of the work area, hit Shift Home, and to the end of the work area, hit Shift End. To trim your work area, you just want to use B for beginning and N for end. If you have a composition with a lot of different layers, you can select a layer in your composition viewer and then hit X on the keyboard to scroll it to the top of your timeline for easy access. If you want to move through your timeline frame by frame, you can hit the page up to go backwards or page down to go forwards. If you don't have an extended keyboard with page up and page down, you can also use Command and the forward arrow to go forward, or Command and the backward arrow to go backward. If you want to go in bigger increments, hold down Shift and Command, and this will go in 10 frame increments. Let's take a look at some keyboard shortcuts when working with layers. So if you want to rename a layer, just hit Enter to rename. This also works within the project panel. To select all of your layers in your timeline, hit Command A. If you want to split a layer, just do Command Shift D. This is helpful if you want to have the layer parented to another layer at some point, and then later you don't want it to be parented, or vice versa. The left bracket key will move the start of the layer to your playhead, and the right bracket key will move the end of your layer to your playhead. If you want to trim a layer, do Option and the left bracket to trim the beginning of your layer to your playhead, or if you want to trim the end of the layer to your playhead, then do Option and the right bracket key. If you want to change the layer order, you can use Command and left bracket to bring the layer down, or Command and right bracket to bring the layer up. And if you want to move the layer all the way to the back, Command Shift and the left bracket will bring it all the way to the bottom. Or if you want to bring the layer all the way to the top, Command Shift and the right bracket. If you want to move the anchor point to the center of a layer and you have an extended keyboard, you can do Option, Command, and the Home button to center the anchor point in the middle of the layer. Here are some keyboard shortcuts for navigating properties and keyframes. The first set of keyboard shortcuts is to find the transform properties faster than you could by just toggling down. So if you hit P on the keyboard, it'll bring up the position property. And if you don't have any layers selected, it'll bring up the position property on all layers. Or, alternatively, if you just want to see the position property of one or a few layers, then just have those ones selected and hit P. And that goes for all of these other transform shortcuts too. So S is going to be scale, R is going to be rotation, T is opacity, and A is anchor points. If you want to see all of your keyframes, just hit U on the keyboard. And if you want to close all those layers back up, then hit U again. If you want to see any effects applied to layers, then just hit the E key. If you have a layer that's opened up like this and has a bunch of different keyframes, but you only want to see the keyframes of one specific property, you can select that property and then just double tap the S key. If you've clicked U on the keyboard to see all of your keyframes, but you actually only want to see some of them, you can hide the properties that you don't want to see by hitting Option and Shift and clicking on the property. If you want to add a property to the view, you can use those transform keyboard shortcuts plus the Shift key. So say that I also wanted to see the position property, I could do Shift P, and that'll add the position property to view. If you want to move your playhead from one keyframe to the next, hitting K will go forward to the next keyframe, and hitting J will go back to the previous keyframe. If you want to apply easy ease to keyframes, just select them, one or multiple, and hit F9. And keep in mind that on a Mac, you're going to have to press the Fn key as well as F9.